You're listening to In Sickness, a podcast about caregiving with Allison Breininger and Justin Bima. Good morning, Allison.
Hey, Justin. How are things in your world today?
Things are going okay.
Yeah.
This week has been a lot better than the previous week.
Okay.
Last week, Mosey was sick.
Oh, Mosey
And
the
so
dog.
She had some digestive trouble. And so we spent the week having to take her outside a lot without going into too many details.
Yep.
And she got very good at letting us know when she needed to, which included multiple times over the course of the night for several nights. So there were days where I was up 3 times in the night to take her outside. And that lack of sleep is like the one thing that I just really struggle with handling.
Yep.
And so that was a pretty rough week, and like stacked on top of that, work was really intense and stressful. And so like I came out of last week completely exhausted.
Yeah.
We got Mosey into the vet. She got on some meds. She's pretty much back to normal now. So that's great. Work has still been stressful this week. So it's kind of been trying to find some space to rest when I can.
Yeah.
And just trying to recover, trying to just hang on, still feeling, just in general, still feeling real burned out.
Yeah.
And just kind of trying to hold on. But
man, I'd hope that someday when we're having one of these conversations, that you are able to not feel burnt out. I feel like it's been a mantra of yours for so long now, and for all the reasons.
Yeah.
And I just wish for you as your friend that at some point you're like, actually, I'm feeling okay,
Right. Yeah.
So that's my wish for you. And I also just want to acknowledge that now you were just a caregiver for the dog.
Right. Yeah.
And dealing with medical issues with the dog.
Yeah.
And I would guess, I don't know for sure, but I would guess that a lot of those things like getting up in the night and doing a lot of the extra work that came with having a sick dog, that maybe those were things that Sarah maybe did not have the capacity to do, which meant that probably it was more so on your plate than on hers. And so just want to acknowledge that like you were already a burnt out caregiver, and now you added another patient to your roster.
Yeah.
That was actually Sean's big fear, when we got Winston. We were like, Maya and I were all on board.
Yeah.
Let's get a dog. And Sean was like, I don't know. And that's what he says. He's like, I just don't, my energy is up and down, and I just didn't know if I was going to be able to help and do the things. And so, of course, it turned into Maya and me saying, we'll do all of it. You won't have to lift a finger. And of course, Winston brings so much joy, as I know Mosey does. But anytime you add another creature, there's the chance you're going to be a caregiver for somebody else.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm glad she's feeling better.
Yes.
Yeah.
What about you? How's your week or so been going?
Let's see. Sean had another skin thing.
Oh.
I know. So he went in. They had one spot that they had biopsied last time that came back cancerous. It was on his leg, which was weird. And so we knew we were going in for that to remove more of that. And then they were like, we're going to also do a full body skin check. And he's so aware of his own body that he's typically able to be like, this one kind of thing.
Right.
But, they did a full body skin check. And so there were a couple that he came in with, like, I've just noticed this thing on my shoulder. But then they found more. And so in the end, they found 6 spots that they're concerned about, that they biopsied, and they just kept slicing and dicing away. So now we're waiting, while he's all bandaged up, we're waiting for the results on the other 6. I don't know that we've ever had a moment where they come back and they're like, none of them are cancer. I don't think that's ever happened. And we don't assume that it will happen this time either.
Right.
So, so that happened.
That's a lot.
It's a lot. I love, there was a great caregiving moment where they're like, usually they use dissolvable stitches, but they're like, we're going to use these, we want to use these stronger stitches, And they're like, so in 2 weeks, do you want to come back to the clinic or you want to just do it yourself? I was like, oh, girl, I got this. Stitches, that's fine. That's fine. I've done way more than that.
Yes.
So You can pay me the copay that we would have paid to go to the clinic, and I will remove the stitches for you in 2 weeks. Oh, but it was reminding me that the previous time he went in for a derm thing, the day that they did a couple Mohs procedures and then they biopsied other ones, was maybe a month ago.
Okay.
And at that time, I was really struggling. I was I had switched some meds and my anxiety was through the roof. And I was just feeling really, I'm trying to be more gentle with myself than saying unstable, but it felt unstable. It felt like unpredictable and just like I couldn't handle one more thing.
Right.
And so the day of his procedure came and I was like, I can't go. And that is not something, I mean, I have been there through all of the things.
Yeah.
Unless I was like sick. I always go to all the things. And it was a big deal for me to say, like, I can't go. But I just knew that, like, my current emotional state, I didn't have it in me. I didn't have the capacity to sit in a room and for a whole day and watch them slice and dice my husband. I just couldn't, like, wasn't able to like sort of shut it off like I often am and just be like, here I go. I just couldn't. And I mean, Sean's amazing. So he was like, I understand. I will be sad that you will not be there, but that's okay. So off he went, and it was fine-ish. Unfortunately, it was the clinic that was like 40 minutes away. And so then, he drove himself, all the things.
Yeah.
But, made it through and all that. But I felt guilty.
Yeah. Right.
Like, this is my job. And he was like, all the nurses and the staff are like, where's Allison? And he's like, it's just, it wasn't the same in the room without you and all of that. And an interesting thing is that later that night, to not to get too gruesome, but like one of the spots was like profusely bleeding, like bleeding through all of his 3 pairs of pants that he always wears in the winter. And so like it turned into this whole thing and we almost had to go to the ER and all that stuff. And I felt better because I got to do a caregiving thing that day.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
I sort of felt redeemed as I sat there, like calling the nurse line and doing a pressure bandage and and cleaning up the blood, that it was like, okay, I'm not a total slacker. So that whole experience and so many other ones it reminded me of this topic of self-compassion.
Yeah.
And so I was thinking that's something that we could talk about today, both for ourselves, but also I just think it's something that caregivers, we don't do it very well.
Right. Yeah.
So when you hear that, or when you think about that term, like what does that stir up in you, or what do you think about in your experience?
Yeah. When I think about self-compassion, I think when I was early in therapy, I think with my last therapist, like that's something that we talked about and kind of worked through some. And so, yeah, I think about like giving yourself space to like, one, just acknowledge whatever it is that you're feeling, like whether that's you're feeling guilty because you couldn't go to the clinic that day, whether that's like you're just feeling a lot of grief over losses related to, your life as a caregiver, whatever that could be, to like pause and let yourself just be with those emotions and feel them and acknowledge them and like just give yourself space around that.
Yeah.
I think is a big part of it. I know for me, and I assume this is something, I don't remember exactly from, therapy or something, but like when I'm in those moments and it's like, I'm trying to like leave space for that, like taking both of my hands and like putting them on my chest and like applying some pressure.
Yeah.
Kind of, it's like, I don't know, it's like a weird, sort of the equivalent of like giving yourself a hug kind of.
Yeah.
And that's like, I don't know, just for me, it's letting yourself feel those things, that it's okay to be feeling those things. And like, just really feeling that like, sort of like empathy towards yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like, that's an okay thing to do. I think it's much easier for us to kind of, or that muscle is much easier for us to have that sort of self-compassion posture or compassionate posture towards others.
Right.
I think that's more familiar.
For sure.
And we, if we compare the things that like someone else is experiencing and how we like emotionally respond to that, like we're much harder on ourselves than we are on others. And I think that like a lot of things, this like self-compassion is like a muscle that you have to exercise kind of thing. And I think of it's like a path that, the first couple, we have this, whether you normally respond with being like really hard or critical on yourself, or just like keeping your head down and moving forward and not letting yourself feel or giving yourself space to kind of just acknowledge what's happening. Like that's the well-worn path that like is just like the default, like that's the way I go. Like that's the way my brain flows. And like at the beginning, like to pause and to like just direct that self-compassion towards yourself. Like the first couple times, like you're like clearing brush to make that trail.
Yes.
But the more times you walk that down that path, like that becomes more well-trodden. Like that can become a more default pathway. So it's like, it is something that you have to practice, I think, before it can really kind of become more of a default state.
I love that visual. I think about that, like, because that's literally what happens in our brain is these pathways. And I think I've been trying to do that with like celebrations, because I think, good things happen, but I don't take time with them.
Right.
I just jump to like, and the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. And so I've been trying to get myself to spend time after a good thing happens to be like, wow. And I've been picturing that, like, I'm trying to create this new groove in my brain because the brain is used to going to like bad thing, bad thing, bad thing, bad thing. And, it's sort of like they say it takes like one affirmation. No, it takes like 17 affirmations to like balance out one negative thing that someone says to you. And so like I can hear one insult and like 17 compliments, right? And and so same thing, like what are these grooves that we can do? And so to build sort of practices for ourselves to do that. And I love, when you said you put your hands on your heart, to say, because I think about that, like if it was you, like how would I react to you and to you, my friend? And I would be like, it's fine. Like what? No, you're okay. You know what I mean? But I'm nicer to you than I am to me. Some people say if we talk to ourselves as nicely as some people talk to their pets or their plants, right. You know what I mean? Like, why do we give it to everybody else and not to ourselves? I spend a lot of time talking to caregivers, and sometimes it's like they almost like whisper, like sometimes I feel guilty, or sometimes I feel resentful, or sometimes I feel angry. And when I say, yep, they're like, oh, wait, I'm allowed to say that? I can.
Yeah.
Yes. Yep. And I think that caregivers feel like, because they're not the person who is sick, struggling in whatever way, that they feel like they're not allowed to complain, that they're not allowed to say how they feel, because they're not like the center of the situation. And because a lot of people have had people say to them terrible things like, well, you're just being selfish. It's not about you. Or, like terrible things, which make me so mad. Right. Yes. And so I think we're not used to, as caregivers, being able to admit and knowing that we could admit these feelings that we're having. And there is every reason in the world for all of us to be feeling lonely, exhausted, angry, resentful, sad, all the things. But it's a step for us to even be able to be like, is it okay that I feel those? Yep. It's okay. Yeah. Yep. It is. Sure.
Yeah. I think like one of the things when I was kind of reading a little bit about this self-compassion kind of before this episode is like, it's often easier. It can be easier to start with focusing on like compassion towards others as kind of an entry point to like, okay, then turning that inward towards yourself. And I think as caregivers, like we are very used to like compassion towards the person we're caring for.
Yeah. Yep.
Like I think that's a big part for a lot of us, like as caregivers, that's like part of our role. And so like there's kind of, acknowledging the suffering that the person we're caring for is going through is like kind of the first step of this like compassion. And then like being moved by that and like feeling that empathy, feeling like you want to do something, feeling like you want to help, like just all of those kind of feelings that come up around like holding space for the suffering of the person you're caring for.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something that a lot of caregivers, like that's a familiar feeling. Like I think of how I've talked about in the past, like sometimes Sarah is not doing well at all, and there's nothing I can do but like be witness to her pain. Which is like, I think, a form of like compassion towards her in those moments. And so I think that like taking that and then understanding kind of that process and turning it towards ourselves, and like understanding, acknowledging when it is that we're suffering. And that could be because we just feel burned out and overextended. It could be that we've just had a hard day and we're struggling. I think that so often there's just that mindset that we just kind of have to keep our head down and keep going. And like not pause and just acknowledge our own struggle, our own pain around that. And I think that like, if like self-compassion is something that you're struggling with, like starting with, I think there's kind of like two sort of levels, maybe. Like there's the one of just seeing like, okay, I'm struggling, I'm suffering, I'm hurting, like, and feeling that compassion towards that. Then you get into the like, maybe you made a mistake, maybe you didn't speak up in an appointment like you wished you would have, and like it's very easy in those moments to turn and be self-critical towards yourself. Like those are the harder ones to then like respond to yourself in compassion. I think
in some ways though, those feel so concrete. I think it's pretty concrete to be like, oh shoot, I forgot to pick up that prescription, or I forgot to or I didn't, I dropped the whatever. Whereas the feelings thing, I think is almost easier to ignore.
I think, that's true.
And I love when you're talking about like this parallel of thinking about how we care for our person. So like I could be across the room from Sean in a busy party when we used to do that thing, that kind of thing, and could see like, okay, he's not feeling well. Like he looks a little pale, or like I could notice, like I'm so attuned to his feelings and his emotions and his well-being that I could see that from a mile away. And I will zoop over there and do whatever needs to happen to be like, would you like to lie down? Do you need some juice? Do you want to go home? Do you know what I mean? But why can't I do that for me?
Right.
Like a million times a day, I'm like, is anything I can get you? Are you comfortable? Are you whatever? Like, why am I not saying to myself, Allison, what can I get you to be comfortable? You know what I mean?
It's and like so we never slow down and just pause to like, okay, check in with ourselves.
Right. And that when we do check in, to be honest about what we see, and when we see it, to be like, I'm feeling resentful today. To be like, yep, and that's okay. It makes perfect sense for you to feel resentful. Your life is not going the way you had expected it. Right. You have a hard life. It's okay to feel resentful. So I think the acknowledgement and then the compassion that comes with it to ourselves. And I think part of that too, part of it is like a it's like saying it to ourselves. And it's also, I think, a helpful practice if we can find a safe person, right? Because so many caregivers I talk to, like I said, like kind of dip their little toe out and they say to somebody like, man, I feel really lonely, or this is really hard, or I wish this wasn't our life. And then somebody comes back at them with some dumb thing. Right. And so it's knowing that there are people like you and like me who are safe people that you can say that to. Because I think that's what happens. They get a dumb response and then they just shut down. And then they're like, well, I guess I am not supposed to feel that.
Right.
Because I put it in the air and it got shut down. So for people listening to know that, like, just because someone says something dumb to you doesn't mean that it's not, it's not true.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we were talking about sort of like the feelings, and then you also brought up like make a mistake. Yeah. Right. So I was thinking about this, that like neither of us have any formal medical training.
Right.
And if anybody else was like, oh, I just got this like part-time job added on and they didn't train me and they're not paying me and it's really high stakes, and then one day I made a mistake, we'd be like, yeah, what kind of job is it that they don't train you? And you don't have a supervisor, and you don't have reviews and a handbook. So in any other thing, we would be like, of course you made a mistake. How are you not making mistakes all the time?
Yeah.
But for some reason in this one, we're like, oh man, I made a mistake,
I think part of it is that often like the stakes can feel very high. Like it can be like we're talking about the health and well-being of this person that we care for so much. And there's so much that we can't do, like medically, like that anything we want to try to, like any bit of the situation that we can try to control or improve or something, like we want to be working on that. And so any time that we feel like we don't do enough or forget something, like because there's so much pressure, because the stakes are high sometimes, because it's this person that we care about so much, like it's so easy to be so critical of ourselves. And like you said before, like thinking about how you would respond to someone else who did the same thing. And like, we wouldn't expect someone else to handle these situations perfectly. Right. And yet we put all that pressure on ourselves.
I feel like I hear the word should a lot from caregivers that are like, I should be able to do it all. Why?
Right.
You know, I'm the mom, I'm the wife, I'm the husband, I'm the cousin. I should be able to do all of this. No.
No. However much you're doing is like incredible.
Exactly. Yeah. And if you fell asleep and so you missed this thing or you whatever. Yep. Even the people who this is like their primary job and they're trained for it make mistakes, because guess what? We are humans.
Right.
Right. But we're doing this on top of all the other things and we're not trained for it. And we're like in our stress brain so much. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of a miracle we don't make more mistakes.
Right.
So I think that word should, like I should be the best. I should be able to do it all. I should. Why?
Right.
We would not expect that in any other realm. So it's definitely, we're putting on ourselves. You know, I have this card hanging in my office because I have like a whole wall of like quotes and things. And I pulled this off the wall this morning. And ironically, it's a card that I got from your beautiful wife, who is the best at sending mail and just like brightens up my mailbox. So it's a card. It's from that Emily McDowell and Friends card. Yeah. And she partnered with Elizabeth Gilbert, who had been a caregiver for her partner, to make some caregiver cards.
Oh, nice.
And so this one says, your job was never to be the best caregiver. Your job is to find mercy for yourself. And so when I see that, I think the wording feels a little weird to me, but I think the concept is like, there is no best caregiver.
Right.
Right. This isn't like a job where we're climbing the ladder and we have all the things, right? You are the caregiver that you are.
Right.
And you're doing your best in an incredibly hard situation.
Yeah.
And so, the second part is like, and so we need to find mercy for ourselves in this incredible, because I think what we aren't even talking about is the emotional strain, right?
Yeah.
It's not like we just have this really hard job that's like sort of robotic. We have a really hard job that includes the emotion of watching our favorite person in the world suffer.
Right.
And so that's on top of it.
That's a lot.
Right? It's a lot.
It's so much.
It's a lot. Yeah.
Are you familiar with Kristen Neff?
You know, it's funny you say that, because in the last couple of weeks, I feel like her name just keeps popping up.
Okay.
And so, because she's self-compassion, like that's her, right?
She researches self-compassion, basically.
Yeah. So I had looked her up a little bit in preparation for this, because her name is just like, I keep hearing about her. But yeah, you tell me, what have you read from her?
When she talks about self-compassion, there's like, she has kind of a 3-step sort of thing around it. And I kind of talked about the first 2 a little bit, where it's like you see the suffering, or you see your own suffering. And then the second step sort of is like you're moved by that to like help, or, you just feel that empathy or that compassion. And the third step is like the acknowledgement that like you're not alone in feeling that way.
Yeah.
Like if you're feeling your suffering, like everybody is suffering, everybody's feeling pain, everybody is struggling. If you have made a mistake, like that, we all make mistakes.
Yep.
And I love that like third piece of it, because it's like so often our experience as caregivers is just this like very isolating experience. And it feels like we're all alone. And I think that acknowledging that like, yeah, I made a mistake. Well, other caregivers also make mistakes, and kind of thinking of it that way. All humans make mistakes. Like, I'm not alone in that. And that I think that there's something to that of kind of, I don't know if it's letting yourself off the hook a little bit, or just being able to give yourself a little more grace. But I just really like the opening up of that kind of final step to like, this is not a unique thing that I'm feeling this way. Like this is the human condition.
Totally. There's actually a quote I wrote down from her that says, suffering and personal inadequacy is part of the shared human experience.
Mm-hmm.
And yep.
Yeah.
Right. And that's why I'm so glad that you and I have this podcast and we talk to each other, because that's what we hear from other caregivers. They're like, I didn't know anybody else was thinking this. I didn't know anybody else was feeling this. Right. And so, yeah, we make mistakes, and yeah, we feel all the feels. And beyond just burnout and tired, but like feelings about our role and how like we wish this wasn't the way.
Yeah.
You know, somebody said to me recently something like, it's not like I would ever leave my sick spouse, but sometimes I just wish I could get off the roller coaster.
Right.
And it was like, as they said that, you could tell they were like, are you going to hate me because I just said that? And I was like, no, absolutely not. It makes perfect sense. We'd all jump off the roller coaster if we could.
Yeah.
None of us bought tickets for this roller coaster. So it's things like that I think they just like bubble up, and we just hold on to them, and we're like, oh, we think them, and then we're like, oh shoot, now I'm a terrible person because I just thought that. And then that just swirls and swirls and swirls until, if we can just say it, if we can give ourselves that grace and that compassion and say it out loud to a safe person who's going to be like, yep. And like you said, put your hands on your chest and be like, it makes perfect sense that that's something that I wish for.
Yeah.
It makes perfect sense.
Yeah. I had actually written down a different quote from Kristen Neff that I thought was really good about all of this self-compassion thing is, perhaps most importantly, having compassion for yourself means that you honor and accept your humanness. Things will not always go the way you want them to. You will encounter frustrations, losses will occur, you will make mistakes, bump up against your limitations, fall short of your ideals. This is the human condition, a reality shared by all of us. The more you open your heart to this reality instead of constantly fighting against it, the more you will be able to feel compassion for yourself and all your fellow humans in the experience of life.
That's good.
Right?
The phrase that jumped out at me was the bump up against your limitations.
Yeah.
Because I think... I feel like we're all slamming up against our limitations. We're not just bumping up against it. That sounds too gentle.
The daily occurrence.
Right. We are crashing through our limitations. And so to realize that we are doing this like impossible thing, and we're doing it as well as we can on each day, as humans. And can we just acknowledge we are also humans doing this really hard thing in 2 years of a pandemic?
Right.
Because I'm not trying to be a broken record, but I think that we're getting to a point where we're sort of like not acknowledging the impact of that as much.
Right.
And somebody sent me a card the other day and said, congratulations on this and this. And then said, especially because the world is so hard right now.
Yeah.
And that just really helped me to be like, yeah, like every celebration should be even more of a celebration.
Yeah.
Because it's been done in this really hard time, or every mistake is sort of cushioned even more.
Right. Because what we're like, there's so much on top of everything else right now. Yes.
Totally. And I think that's when I think about this, a third thing I think about is like it's also okay to need and to take a break.
Yes.
And so like for me in that appointment, like I am glad I made that decision. And when I went in this week and they were like, we missed you last time, Allison, I just had to be like, yep, sorry, but I think that sometimes I get mad at my body and I get mad at my emotions, and I'm like, pull it together, Breininger. Like, come on, and that's the opposite of what I should be doing. But it's like, if I think about what I ask my body and my brain and my emotions to do every day, it's like, it's pretty miraculous that I keep going and doing as well as I do.
Yes.
But on the days when I'm like so tired or I'm anxious or whatever, sometimes I can get really like mad at myself because I don't want to feel that way.
Right.
I'm like, you don't have time to be tired. You don't have time to be anxious. Come on, pull it together. And that's what I need.
Right.
So, in that moment is what I need, self-compassion.
I think it's it's an understandable pattern that we get into where we end up ignoring our own needs or pushing our own needs aside and we're so focused on our person.
Yeah.
And that's to make space for us to, like, one, simply acknowledge the needs that we have, whether or not we're in a place to act on them and give ourselves a break or not, but to acknowledge that, I'm exhausted, I need a break, even if it's not there.
Mm-hmm.
But like acknowledging that you have needs that are not being met, or that,
mm-hmm.
and then, like, I think as much as you can and the situation allows, to try to practice exercising that, taking care of yourself
Mm-hmm.
in those moments. Like, that's another path
Mm-hmm.
that we've got to take effort to walk down the first,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, 100 times
Mm-hmm.
before it kind of can become a more like default kind of mindset.
It makes me think, like, I feel like people in interviews and stuff like to say, Allison, who takes care of you?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm always like, no one. I don't know,
Yeah.
And so you usually, like, if I would say, well, I do, that sounds sort of like sad and lonely, but I think in the way we're talking about today, it sort of could be a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
And I certainly have lovely people in my life who care for me. But, I think so, instead of just being like, well, I guess it's just me here left to take care of myself, to be like, I am really good at caring for people. Like, I'm a ninja level caregiver for Sean.
Right.
How can I transfer even an ounce of it to myself?
Yeah.
And to be as aware of my needs and current state as I am with his, and to check in with myself as often as I check in with him, and to offer myself comfort and support as much as I offer it to him, and grace. Like, if he messed up, I would be like, of course, it's fine.
Yeah.
But would I say that to myself? And so how can I mirror the thing? Because I'm already really good at it.
Right.
I'm great at it with him. So it's not learning a new skill. It's just transferring it.
Yeah.
To myself.
Something I was thinking about this week is, we've talked about the ring theory before, where it's, you have the person at the center of the crisis, and then you have these concentric rings moving out as, like, you have the immediate caregivers, maybe the next ring, and then you have kind of your next support people, and so on and so forth. And you care inward and you, like, dump outward.
Yep.
And I think we're so used to, like, having the person we're caring for being at the center of everything. But to acknowledge that there is also a parallel set of rings in which, like, our inner self is at the center of that ring. And, like, we can be the next ring out and care in for ourselves, kind of. And, like, taking that path rather than, like, directing all that criticalness or self-blame or complaining inward towards that, like, inner self at the center of that circle, like, to work on directing that care inwards towards ourselves.
Interesting. I love when you come up with these visual things, because that's so how my brain works. And so that, like, really is helpful for me, because it's almost like we can dump out to ourselves as well. Like, we can, like, if you see sort of like, I have like a parallel Allison here next to me, and I can talk to Allison and say, hey, like, this is how I feel. You know what I mean? And then Allison can show compassion back in.
Right.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. I'm wondering, when you do the thing where you put your hands on your heart, what might you say to yourself in that moment?
It's kind of I don't have, like, a phrase or something that I say necessarily with that. It's kind of like I don't know how to, it's like a nonverbal kind of just, like, posture towards myself, kind of. It's like, it feels like it's just a physical expression of, like, giving myself a hug. And just being there. And, like, acknowledgement of pain, of suffering, of frustration, of whatever it is. And just, like, pausing in that space, pausing to feel that emotion. Because so quickly we jump from that first, like, I feel frustrated that this thing happened today, to, like, the emotions that's like, okay, this is how I feel about the fact that I was frustrated today, or like, and spiraling from there. Whereas just like pausing in that just immediate first order emotion, I guess, if that makes sense.
It does. Yeah.
And just like, okay, let's just let myself feel that thing.
Yeah.
And slowing down.
Yeah.
And just kind of, and it's breathing along with that, I think, is part of it, just consciously breathing. And it's just it's a slowing down. I don't know how to put it other than just like directing self-compassion towards myself.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, I love it because it's like an actual physical. Well, also like when you do that, like, man, it just feels so good when you put your hand on your chest. Feels so grounding. And it's something we could do at any moment, you know, and like even during a stressful meeting, you turn your camera off or you whatever, and you can just be doing this and nobody can even see, you know. So it's something that's available to us at any moment.
Right.
So I think it's like that's a strategy. And then thinking about like noticing a feeling or even taking a minute to think about the feeling.
Right.
You're like to like almost like do a scan.
Do a check in and see what am I feeling?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And then to have some of those phrases ready for ourselves of like, yep, it makes perfect sense that that's how you're feeling. Yep, you're human. Yep.
It's okay that I'm feeling this way.
Yep.
Like,
yeah. I'm doing my best in a hard situation. So I think some of those strategies that we can start to do for ourselves and the things, and I'm wondering even for myself, like every time I say to Sean, like, anything you need? Like, how can I then in my own self say, Allison, anything you need?
Right.
You know, or how you doing? Anything, you know, like every time I check in with him, check in with myself, every time, you know, like even if I only do it 50% of the amount of time that I do it for him, that would be a huge increase to what I do for myself, you know? I'm wondering, you know, we typically at the end talk about supporters.
Right.
But today's topic is so much about ourselves. And so I'm just trying to think about if I'm a supporter and I'm listening, are there things that a supporter can do to help a caregiver? Because I think sometimes it can feel more like, are you taking care of yourself? And we don't want that.
No, we don't.
Right. But I think acknowledgement is a huge piece. Somebody said to me once recently, what would you say to your friend if they said this to you?
Right.
Or if they were in this situation, right? And so some of those sort of like mirroring back phrases might help. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I think if you're a supporter and you're, you know, having a conversation with a caregiver, saying things like, I can see that you might be really struggling right now, or what you're going through is so hard. Like, and it's understandable that things are hard, that you're exhausted, that you're frustrated, or that I see that, you know, you must really be suffering through this, and just kind of voicing some of those things that maybe caregivers could do better at voicing to themselves. If that makes sense.
It does.
Without going into the like, you should really be taking more care of yourself.
Right.
But just that understanding and acknowledgement of the difficulty of the struggle, of the loss, of the challenges, and just the acknowledgement of that. And if you can bring that to like, I see that you're struggling, and I know that you're, you know, not alone in that. Something to that effect.
Yeah, for sure. I think the other thing is being a safe space.
Yes.
So if a caregiver says something to you that's really vulnerable, so if they say to you, man, sometimes I just feel really angry or resentful, or I want to hop off the roller coaster, you know, as a listener, we tend to take care of our feelings first. And so that makes us feel uncomfortable. And so then we want a bright side and we want all the things, right? And so to recognize like, wow, that must have been like, thank you for sharing with me those feelings. And it makes sense that you feel those feelings. And so just to notice that like they are giving you a gift and they're sort of dipping their little toe out into the world to be like, can I say this really like my deepest truth that I've never said out loud? And your response supporter is going to sort of determine if they feel like it's safe to say these things in the world.
Right.
No pressure. But, you know, just like give them that space and to say, and to not try to bright side or not downplay or any of those things back at them when they open themselves up in that way.
Yeah, I think that's very good.
I want to make a quick plug, if I may, just to say that, I do coaching with caregivers. And so if you're interested in if you're listening and you're interested in having a safe space, because I tell you with almost every session, somebody will say something and then I'll be like, yep. And then they're just like shocked, like, oh,
right.
Do you feel that too? I'm allowed to say that out loud? So anyway, you can reach out to me if you're interested in that, or if you're a supporter and you want to say, hey, caregiver, I've heard about this resource. Feel free. I also hope that you all can find at least one safe person in your lives that you can say things to. And if not, Justin and I are here. You can message us anytime.
Absolutely.
Yeah. This feels lovely in a way to think about.
Yeah.
Because it feels different from the buzzword self-care. And I kind of love that, the self-compassion part. And I'm excited to kind of try some of these things and see how that's going to change how I feel as I go through my day.
Yeah.
Because they seem easy.
Right.
But like game changers,
Well, right. And kind of, I think another thing that made me maybe originally think about this whole self-compassion as a topic is you've been talking about kind of for your year, like you want to try to be more gentle with yourself. And like, I think self-compassion is such a important, lovely, beautiful piece of that posture of gentleness towards yourself.
Yes. I think you were the one that gave me that word, gentle. Remember? I think because we were talking on New Year's Day. And so you're right.
That could be.
Yeah. So that's true. That word does resonate with that. And that's something I've been trying to do. So I'm going to continue that.
Great.
Yeah. This, sometimes at the end of these, I feel a little like, whew, we just ran a little emotional marathon. But today I feel kind of like cozy and
that's good.
Ready to go try some new things. So that feels good.
Good. Well, it's been a great conversation.
Yeah. Thanks for talking about this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sure. And Kristen Neff is the author that he and I were both, that we were both referencing today. If anybody wants to look it up, it looks like she has a TED Talk and a book and all the things. So if you're interested in self-compassion, listeners, you can check out Kristen Neff.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, here's to a new week, being more compassionate to ourselves and gentle with ourselves. And we can check in next time about how that's feeling.
All right. That sounds great.
All right. Thanks.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye. You've been listening to In Sickness. Find us online at insickness.care or on Instagram at insicknesspodcast. You can send your questions and comments to insicknesspodcast@gmail.com. If you enjoyed the show, please share it with a friend or fellow caregiver, or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Thanks for listening, and take care.